When most people hear the word anarchism, they probably think of a society filled with chaos and violence. But there's a bit more to anarchy than that. Anarchism literally means without a ruler. So an anarchic society would be a society without any politicians, formal institutions, or laws. A society without the state. We've spent the past few weeks talking about freedom and the role of government in securing our freedom. But might we actually be more free without any government at all? Can we have order, law, and freedom without the state? Let's turn to philosophers and see what they have to say about anarchy. The argument for why we need government goes back to our good friend Thomas Hobbes in the 1600s. Hobbes had this thought experiment called the state of nature, where he imagined what life would be like without a government. And his conclusion was that it would be a nightmare. Without a state, humans would end up in constant war and violence. Life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So to Hobbes, we need a government to keep us from killing each other. Now there's another philosopher, John Locke, who is slightly more optimistic than Hobnob. Locke thought we'd last a little bit longer in a state of nature than Hobbes did. He didn't think people would immediately go and murder each other. Instead, he thought we'd be quite good at resolving disputes and harmoniously coexisting. But despite all this, Locke reasoned that we'd still be better off with the state. The problem, according to Locke, is that people are biased. When we get into conflicts with others and try to resolve disputes, we're going to be naturally partial towards ourselves. We might be vengeful and we might overreact. And so we need government protections like a system of law and order to help us administer justice. Now, here's the anarchist response to these philosophers. An anarchist would say, sure, the state might have helped civilize us historically, but that doesn't mean we need the state forever. We can think about it like this. Our parents taught us moral sensibility when we were kids, but they don't need to follow us around for the rest of our lives to make sure that we stay moral. We internalize those values and continue to act upon them, even when our parents' guidance is no longer there. And so maybe the same is true for society. Maybe the state at one point was necessary for helping us develop norms of cooperation and order, but now that we have those norms, do we still need the state? Robert Nozick, a fitted up libertarian philosopher, had a really interesting response. He argued that no, we don't need an official state. We don't need an official constitution, rule of law, or judiciary board. Rather, systems similar to these will emerge naturally out of our own self-interest. He called this the invisible hand explanation. In a state of nature, to handle disagreements, we'd band together with others to ensure mutual protection. Basically, we'd arrange ourselves into small collectives. These collectives would settle their own rules and methods for handling disagreement. With time, some collectives might fall into conflict with each other. If the collectives were unevenly matched, the dominant one would absorb the other. And if the collectives were evenly matched, then the conflict would escalate until a compromise was reached. That compromise would basically be the establishment of common rules, judges, or court. And just like that, out of anarchy, something like a minimal state emerges, naturally, without anyone imposing it. Now, Nozick thought he was giving an argument for the inevitability of the state, but actually, he only gave an argument for the inevitability of law. Just because a group might form common rules, judges, and courts, that doesn't make them a state. FIFA, for example, has courts, rules, judges, and elaborate legal systems, but FIFA isn't a state. And why? Because it doesn't have a monopoly of force. As defined by philosopher Max Weber, a state is a compulsory political organization with a monopoly on the use of legitimate force. Nozick showed how law emerges naturally, but again, not how the state emerges. So, as shown by Nozick, maybe anarchist systems can develop sophisticated laws, but without the state and the monopoly of force, they can't deliver on two crucial values. The first is equality before the law, where everyone is treated equally under law. And second is access to remedies, where victims of wrongs can actually get justice. The issue is that anarchist law is consent-based. Someone might only follow the rules that they agree to, as there's no threat of punishment or force if they choose to not follow certain rules. A close example of this is current international law. International law is anarchist in its structure. There's no world government, no one sovereign with a monopoly of force. Countries only follow treaties that they consent to. And it's messy. Some countries just just ignore rulings that they don't like. Enforcement is decentralized and inconsistent. Powerful countries can opt out of treaties whenever they like, and war crime tribunals only work when countries cooperate. There are enforcement mechanisms, sanctions, reputational damage, and getting ostracized, but they're uneven. Powerful countries face fewer consequences than weaker ones. So consent-based systems struggle to deliver equality and accountability. So what might anarchists say to all this? Peter Kropotkin, a Russian anarchist, pointed to real-world examples of large-scale coordination without the state, like the European railway system. In the 1800s, railways across Europe were built through free agreement. There was no railway committee, no laws, armies, or courts enforcing the building of the railways, but it was successfully done out of a common interest. Another example is the Red Cross, which was formed by spontaneous initiative. Kropotkin's point is that free agreement and voluntary organization can run complex systems cheaper and better than coercive states. So maybe the question isn't, can anarchism work, but under what conditions does anarchism work, and under what conditions does it fail? Perhaps pure anarchism doesn't work for large, complex society, but pure state control might not work well either. Maybe the solution is a hybrid. We need strong institutions to prevent domination, Republican freedom, but we also need to allow room for voluntary cooperation, mutual aid, and self-organization where it works. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Next week, we're going to tackle the question, can you be poor and free? Is poverty a restriction on freedom? And what would the founding fathers have thought about wealth inequality in America today?